There is a moment in every person's life when they realize the truth. The world does not reward the weak, and it does not wait for the fearful. Right now, somewhere in this world, a person with half your talent is walking into a room you're too afraid to enter. Not because they're smarter, not because they're stronger, but because they made peace with something you haven't. The fact that confidence is not a feeling you wait for. It is a weapon you forge. You have been taught a lie. You've been told confidence comes from self-love, from affirmations in the mirror, from positive thinking. But history's most formidable figures, the ones who bent nations to their will, who turned enemies into allies, who walked into rooms and silently commanded them, did not get there by feeling good about themselves. They got there by mastering a brutal truth. The world runs on perception, and the person who controls their own perception controls everything. This is the philosophy embedded in the study of power and human nature. The idea that confidence isn't given, it's built, brick by brutal brick. Out of fear-faced, humiliation survived, and weakness turned into fuel. Today, we're going to dismantle everything you think you know about confidence. We're going to expose why you feel small in rooms you should own. We're going to show you the mask the powerful wear, and why wearing it isn't fake, it's survival. And by the end, you will understand the 6 laws that separate those who tremble from those who make others tremble. This is not motivation, this is a blueprint. Let's begin. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Almost everything you've been told about confidence is designed to keep you exactly where you are. Self-help culture has sold you a fantasy that confidence is an internal state you simply unlock through gratitude journals and mirror affirmations. But look closely at anyone who has ever truly commanded a room, closed a deal, led an army, or built an empire, and you will notice something strange. They rarely talk about feeling confident. They talk about preparation. They talk about control. They talk about understanding people so completely that fear has nowhere left to hide. This is the first law you must accept. Confidence is not a feeling. It is a byproduct of competence and perception management. The moment you chase the feeling of confidence, you become dependent on your emotional weather. Some days you'll have it, most days you won't. But the moment you chase mastery and control of perception, confidence becomes a natural output, not an elusive mood. Think about the last time you felt powerless in a room. Was it because you lacked ability? Or was it because you handed control of the moment to someone else? To their opinion of you, to their judgment, to the story you imagined they were telling about you in their head? This is the trap almost everyone falls into. We are not afraid of the room. We are afraid of the story we imagine the room is writing about us. Here is where the study of power becomes essential. Those who understand human nature know a devastating secret. People are far too consumed with themselves to be studying you as intensely as you fear. Every person walking into that room is running their own internal monologue of insecurity, ambition, and self-doubt. The stage you think you're performing on, where everyone is watching your every flaw, it barely exists. You built it. You are both the actor and the entire audience in a play no one else bought a ticket to. This is liberating, but it's also a weapon. Because once you understand that most people are trapped in their own self-obsessed narrative, you realize something dangerous. Whoever breaks free of that trap first gains enormous power over everyone still stuck inside it. The person who stops performing for imaginary judges and starts observing the room instead of fearing it, that person becomes the most dangerous individual in any environment. Not because they're cruel, because they're free. Now, why does the illusion of confidence persist? Because weakness is profitable. An entire industry survives on convincing you that you are one supplement, one seminar, one course away from finally feeling secure. But security bought externally evaporates the moment the external thing is gone. Real confidence, the unshakable kind, has to be built the way a fortress is built, slowly, deliberately, stone by stone, through real tests, real failures, and real evidence that you can survive discomfort and come out intact. Consider how the most formidable historical figures were built. They were not born untouchable. They were humiliated, betrayed, exiled, doubted, mocked, but instead of avoiding those moments, they metabolized them. Each humiliation became data. Each betrayal became a lesson in human nature. Each failure became proof, hard, undeniable proof, that they could be knocked down and still stand back up. That proof is the only foundation confidence can be built on, not affirmations. Evidence. This is why so many people remain fragile despite success. They've avoided every uncomfortable test. They've protected their ego so carefully that it has never actually been forged. A blade that has never touched fire is not strong. It's just untested metal, brittle and unproven. The moment life finally forces the test on them, a public failure, a painful rejection, a devastating loss, they shatter because there was never any real structure underneath the surface-level confidence they displayed. So here is the first shift you must make today. Stop asking, how do I feel more confident? Start asking, what skill, what understanding, what evidence can I build today that makes fear irrelevant tomorrow? Confidence is not conjured, it's constructed. And construction requires exposure to exactly the situations you've spent your life avoiding. The powerful do not eliminate fear. They simply refuse to let fear write the final decision. Fear becomes information, a signal that something important is at stake, rather than a stop sign. This reframing alone will separate you from 90% of people who let their nervous system dictate their entire life's trajectory. If you trace almost every act of hesitation in your life back to its origin, you will find the same root cause hiding underneath it. The fear of being judged, not the fear of failure itself, not the fear of pain. The fear of what failure will make people think of you. This is the quiet tyrant that has run your life since childhood, and almost no one names it directly, because doing so requires admitting something uncomfortable that you have for years allowed strangers, acquaintances, and even people who don't particularly care about you to have veto power over your decisions. Human beings evolved in small tribal groups where being cast out meant death. Rejection wasn't just uncomfortable, it was quite literally a death sentence. Your nervous system still believes this. When you imagine embarrassing yourself in a meeting, your body reacts as if you're facing a predator, not a raised eyebrow. This is why public speaking terrifies people more than physical danger in surveys. The ancient wiring inside you cannot distinguish between social death and literal death. Understanding this is the first step toward dismantling its power over you. Because once you see the fear of judgment for what it is, an outdated survival mechanism, not an accurate signal of real danger, you can begin to consciously override it. Here is the brutal insight the study of power forces you to confront. Everyone is performing. Everyone. The confident-looking executive, the effortlessly charming host, the leader who commands a room without raising their voice. Every single one of them is managing a performance, consciously or not. The difference between them and you is not that they lack fear of judgment. It's that they've made a decision. They will not let that fear be visible, and more importantly, they will not let it be the deciding factor in their actions. This is where the concept of the mask becomes essential, and we'll explore it fully in the next part. But for now, understand this. Judgment cannot be avoided. It can only be outmaneuvered. You will be judged whether you act boldly or timidly, whether you speak up or stay silent, whether you pursue the goal or abandon it. Judgment is not optional. Your response to it is, consider this reframe. Every time you feel that hot flush of anticipated embarrassment, ask yourself, in 5 years, will this moment matter? In almost every case, the honest answer is no. The presentation you botched, the joke that fell flat, the rejection you received, these live enormous in your mind for days, then shrink to nothing within months and vanish from everyone else's memory almost immediately. People are simply not thinking about your failures as much as you fear. They are consumed with their own. This is not a comforting platitude. It is a strategic advantage. Once you internalize that the social consequences you fear are wildly overestimated by your own anxious mind, you gain the ability to act while others hesitate. And in nearly every arena of life, business, relationships, creative pursuits, leadership, the person who acts while others hesitate wins by default. Not because they're smarter or more talented, because they showed up when everyone else was still calculating the risk of embarrassment. There's a darker layer to this too. Those who understand human nature know that people often punish confidence they don't possess themselves. If you begin to shed your fear of judgment and act boldly, some people around you will feel threatened not because you did anything to them, but because your freedom exposes their own cage. This is important to understand because it means the resistance you'll face when building confidence isn't always a sign you're doing something wrong. Often, it's a sign you're doing something right, and it's making comfortable people uncomfortable. So how do you actually loosen judgment's grip? Not through affirmations, but through repeated deliberate exposure. Every time you do the thing you're afraid others will judge you for and survive it, you deposit evidence into an internal account. Over time, that account becomes so full of proof that the fear loses its grip, not because you eliminated it, but because you've proven again and again that the worst-case outcome is survivable. This is why comfort is the enemy of confidence. Comfort feels safe, but it is a slow erosion of your capacity to handle discomfort. Every time you choose the safe, silent, invisible option to avoid judgment, you reinforce the belief that judgment is something to be feared rather than endured. And every time you choose exposure, speaking the hard truth, taking the bold action, entering the uncomfortable room, you rewire that belief in the opposite direction. The goal isn't to stop caring what people think entirely. That's neither realistic nor wise, since social awareness has its uses. The goal is to stop letting the fear of judgment be the deciding vote in your life's most important decisions. Once you separate awareness of judgment from obedience to it, an entirely new version of you becomes available, one who acts, speaks, and moves through the world with a freedom most people spend their entire lives longing for. There is a phrase that unsettles people the first time they hear it: the powerful wear a mask. It sounds manipulative, even dishonest, but once you understand what it actually means, you realize it's one of the most liberating truths about human behavior ever articulated. The mask is not about deception. It is about discipline over your emotional expression. It is the recognition that your internal state, your doubts, your anxieties, your insecurities do not need to be broadcast to the world in real time. What you feel internally and what you project externally are two separate systems, and the person who confuses them, who believes they must express every internal fluctuation outwardly, will always be at the mercy of their own nervous system. Think of the most respected leaders, negotiators, and performers you've ever witnessed. In their most difficult moments, under pressure, facing hostile questions, absorbing bad news, they did not collapse into visible panic, not because they felt nothing, because they understood a fundamental law. Emotional leakage is a liability. The moment you visibly display fear, doubt, or desperation, you hand the room information they can use against you, and you signal to everyone watching that you are not in control of the moment. This is not about suppressing emotion in an unhealthy way, bottling things up until they explode. It is about compartmentalization, processing your internal reactions privately on your own time, while presenting a composed, controlled exterior in the moments that matter. The mask is removed later, in private, where you can process fear, frustration, or grief without an audience. But in the arena, the meeting, the negotiation, the stage, the difficult conversation, the mask stays on, because the arena is not the place for raw, unprocessed emotion. It is the place for controlled, deliberate presence. Here's the shocking part: wearing this mask is not fake. It is, in fact, more honest in a strategic sense than most people realize, because the alternative, broadcasting every insecure thought the moment it arises, isn't authenticity. It's simply a lack of discipline mistaken for honesty. True self-command means you decide what gets expressed, when and to whom. You are not a leaf blown by every emotional gust. You are the one steering. Consider the physiological dimension of this. Your body communicates before your words do. Posture, eye contact, the pace of your speech, the steadiness of your hands, these signal confidence or its absence far more powerfully than anything you say. The mask, then, is not just psychological, it is physical. Standing tall when you want to shrink, making eye contact when you want to look away, slowing your speech when your instinct is to rush through nervous words. Each of these is a deliberate override of your body's fear response. And remarkably, research on embodied cognition confirms what strategists have long understood intuitively. Acting composed doesn't just project confidence, it begins to produce it internally. The mask, worn consistently enough, starts to fuse with the face beneath it. This is why the powerful obsess over control of small details, their tone, their timing, their expressions. It's not vanity. It's the recognition that every signal you emit is data other people use to decide how to treat you. If you leak anxiety, people sense an opening to dominate, to dismiss, to underestimate you. If you project calm control, even under pressure, people instinctively defer because human beings are wired to read composure as competence. But here is the crucial nuance almost everyone misses. The mask is not permanent, and it is not for everyone. There must be spaces, trusted relationships, private moments, chosen confidants, where the mask comes off completely, where you allow yourself to be fully seen, doubts and all. A person who wears the mask everywhere, even in their most intimate relationships, doesn't become strong, they become isolated, and isolation eventually corrodes even the strongest exterior. The discipline lies in knowing precisely when the mask serves you and when it should be set aside. The people who misunderstand this concept think it means becoming cold, robotic, or emotionally unavailable. That's a distortion. The mask is not the absence of humanity, it's the strategic control of when your humanity is displayed. A skilled negotiator can be warm, funny, even vulnerable at the right moment, precisely because they've chosen that vulnerability deliberately, rather than having it forced out of them by an inability to manage their nerves. So, how do you begin building this mask? Start small. In your next uncomfortable conversation, notice the urge to visibly display your nervousness, the fidgeting, the over-explaining, the nervous laughter. Then deliberately choose stillness instead. Slow your speech by 20%. Hold eye contact half a second longer than feels natural. These are not tricks, they are training. Over time, this deliberate practice becomes your default state, and what once required immense effort becomes simply who you are in high-pressure moments. The mask, worn with discipline rather than dishonesty, is one of the most powerful tools available to anyone seeking to build unshakable confidence. It buys you the one thing panic always steals: time to think clearly before you act. Here is a truth that will feel counterintuitive at first. The people who possess the deepest, most unshakable confidence are almost never the ones who avoided pain. They are the ones who were broken by it and rebuilt themselves on the other side. We live in a culture obsessed with protecting people from discomfort. But protection from discomfort does not produce strength. It produces fragility. Every time you shield yourself or someone else from failure, criticism, rejection, or hardship, you remove an opportunity for a crucial process, the transformation of pain into structural strength. Think of it like the human body. Muscle does not grow from comfort. It grows from resistance, from the deliberate tearing of fibers under stress, followed by recovery that rebuilds them stronger than before. Psychological resilience follows an almost identical pattern. Confidence is not built in the absence of difficulty. It is built in the aftermath of difficulty survived. This is why so many people who appear to have it all, wealth, comfort, and easy path, often possess a strange fragility beneath the surface. They've never had to develop the internal architecture that comes from facing real adversity and coming through it intact. Meanwhile, people who've endured genuine hardship, public failure, financial ruin, devastating rejection, profound loss, often develop a kind of quiet, unshakable steadiness that no amount of comfort could have manufactured. They've already survived their worst fear. What's left to be afraid of? This is the essential reframe. Pain is not something to avoid on your path to confidence. It is the primary material confidence is built from. The question is not, how do I avoid failure? The question is, how do I extract every possible lesson from failure so it strengthens rather than destroys me? Consider how this plays out practically. Most people, after a humiliating failure, do one of two things. They either spiral into shame and avoid the situation that caused it forever, or they defensively rationalize the failure away, refusing to examine it honestly. Both responses waste the opportunity. The third path, the one that actually builds confidence, requires something much harder. Sitting with the failure, examining it with brutal honesty, extracting the specific lesson it contains, and then deliberately re-entering a similar situation to prove to yourself that you've grown. This is why avoidance is so corrosive to confidence. Every time you avoid a feared situation, you send a message to your own subconscious. This really was too dangerous to face. The fear gets reinforced rather than dismantled. But every time you face the feared situation, even if you fail again, you send the opposite message. I can survive this. I can handle this. This is not the end of me. Confidence isn't built by winning every time. It's built by proving over and over that losing doesn't destroy you. There's a deeper layer here too, rooted in how power dynamics actually function. Those who study human nature closely understand something most people never grasp. Your relationship with your own past failures directly shapes how others perceive your authority in the present. A person who has clearly survived hardship, who speaks about their failures without shame, without needing to hide them, radiates a kind of gravity that untested people simply cannot fake. Scars, worn without apology, become a form of credibility. They tell the room, I have already been tested. Nothing you say to me now can break something that has already been broken and rebuilt. This is why hiding your failures, ironically, keeps you weaker. The instinct to conceal every mistake, every setback, every humbling moment comes from shame. But shame is the very thing that keeps the wound unhealed. The moment you can speak about your worst failure plainly, without flinching, without needing to justify or minimize it, you've extracted its power over you. It no longer controls you from the shadows. It becomes simply a fact of your history, one among many, no more threatening than any other. Practically, this means you must actively seek out discomfort rather than wait for life to impose it on you. Volunteer for the presentation you're afraid of. Have the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Apply for the opportunity you feel unqualified for. Each of these deliberate exposures to potential failure is a deposit into the same account we discussed earlier, the internal reservoir of evidence that you can face hard things and remain intact. And when failure does come, because it will repeatedly for the rest of your life, resist the urge to immediately protect your ego with excuses. Instead, ask 3 questions. What exactly went wrong? What specifically was within my control? What will I do differently next time? This process, repeated consistently, transforms failure from a source of shame into a source of data. And data cannot hurt you the way shame can. The most confident people you will ever meet are not the ones who have failed the least. They are the ones who have made peace with failure as an inevitable, even necessary, part of building something real. They no longer fear it because they've already metabolized enough of it to know it doesn't kill you, it teaches you, and eventually it makes you very difficult to intimidate. There is one final dependency that quietly destroys more confidence than almost anything else, and it is so woven into ordinary life that most people never even identify it as the problem. It is the habit of outsourcing your sense of worth to other people's opinions, approval, and validation. From childhood, we are trained to seek external validation: grades, praise, approval from parents and teachers, likes and comments from strangers online. This training runs so deep that most adults never question it. They simply move from seeking a parent's approval to seeking a boss's approval, to seeking a partner's approval, to seeking the approval of an anonymous audience on the internet. The object of validation changes. The underlying dependency never does. This dependency is the single greatest threat to unshakable confidence, because it means your sense of self is being constantly recalculated by forces entirely outside your control. One person's criticism can undo a week of feeling secure. One piece of praise can inflate you temporarily, only to leave you empty again the moment it fades. You become a leaf in the wind of other people's moods, opinions, and judgments. And no leaf, however resilient, can be called unshakable. Self-reliance, in this context, does not mean isolation or refusing help from others. It means something more precise. Building your sense of worth on a foundation that does not require anyone else's permission to exist. It means your confidence is anchored to your own standards, your own values, your own assessment of your effort and integrity, not to the fluctuating, often self-interested opinions of people around you. Here is a sobering realization that helps cement this shift. Most people's opinions of you are not actually about you at all. They are a reflection of their own insecurities, their own unmet needs, their own limited perspective, filtered through whatever mood they happen to be in that day. The colleague who criticizes your idea in a meeting might be threatened by your visibility, not actually assessing the quality of your thinking. The friend who seems distant might be dealing with something entirely unrelated to you. When you understand that other people's reactions are far more about their internal world than about your actual worth, you stop treating every external response as gospel truth about who you are. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to feedback. That would be foolish, since genuine, well-intentioned feedback is one of the fastest paths to improvement. The distinction is between feedback you actively seek from people whose judgment you respect, used to refine your skill, versus the unsolicited, often careless opinions of people whose approval you've been unconsciously chasing your whole life. The first sharpens you. The second enslaves you if you let it. Building genuine self-reliance requires a specific practice. Developing your own internal scorecard. Before you look outward for validation after completing something difficult, pause and ask yourself, did I do this with integrity? Did I put in real effort? Did I act in alignment with my own standards? If the honest answer is yes, that internal assessment must be allowed to matter more than whatever external response follows. This is difficult because we are so trained to wait for the applause before we allow ourselves to feel satisfied. But applause is unreliable. It can be withheld out of politics, timing, jealousy, or simple oversight, regardless of the actual quality of what you did. Your internal scorecard, built on your own honest standards, is the only truly reliable measure available to you. There's a deeper strategic dimension to this as well. People who understand power dynamics recognize that visible dependency on approval makes you exploitable. If everyone around you can sense that you need their validation to feel secure, they gain leverage over you, whether they intend to use it maliciously or not. Withholding praise becomes a subtle form of control. Offering it becomes a subtle form of manipulation. The moment you stop needing external approval to feel stable, you remove this leverage entirely. You become someone who cannot be controlled through flattery or destabilized through criticism because your foundation simply doesn't depend on either. This is perhaps the deepest form of freedom available to a human being, the ability to walk into any room, face any critic, absorb any rejection, and remain fundamentally unmoved in your sense of your own worth, not because you're arrogant or indifferent to others, but because you've done the difficult internal work of building a self that doesn't require constant external reinforcement to remain standing. Practically, this means auditing where you currently seek validation. Notice how often you check for reactions after posting something, saying something, or doing something. Notice how much your mood depends on whether someone responds warmly or coldly to you today. Each time you catch this pattern, practice returning the assessment to yourself. What do I think of what I just did? Over time, this rewires the entire architecture of your confidence, moving its foundation from unstable external ground to solid internal bedrock. Self-reliance is not the absence of relationships, community, or care for what others think. It is the refusal to let your fundamental sense of worth be a hostage to forces you cannot control. Build this, and something remarkable happens. You become far less reactive, far more steady, and paradoxically, far more magnetic to the very people whose approval you once desperately sought. Because nothing is more attractive than someone who doesn't need it. Everything we've covered so far, the illusion of confidence as a feeling rather than a construction, the fear of judgment as an outdated survival mechanism, the discipline of the mask, the transformation of pain into structural strength, and the law of self-reliance converges into a single final principle. Unshakable confidence is not something you find. It is something you build deliberately, the way a fortress is built. Not overnight and not by accident, but through the accumulation of thousands of small, intentional choices made under pressure. Let's be clear about what this actually looks like in practice, because abstract philosophy means nothing without application. It looks like choosing, in the moment of hesitation before a difficult conversation, to speak anyway, not because the fear disappeared, but because you've decided fear no longer gets veto power over your actions. It looks like receiving criticism, feeling the familiar sting, and instead of either collapsing into shame or defensively lashing out, calmly asking yourself what part of it is useful and what part of it is simply noise. It looks like failing publicly, feeling the humiliation fully and privately, and then showing up again the next day without hiding, without over-explaining, without needing anyone's reassurance that you're still worthy. This is the architecture of the unshakable person, and it's worth naming its components clearly because each one is a discipline you can practice starting today. First, they have separated their internal emotional state from their external presentation, not through suppression, but through deliberate choice about when and where each is expressed. They feel everything a normal human feels: doubt, anxiety, disappointment, but they've trained themselves not to let every internal fluctuation dictate their outward behavior in moments that matter. Second, they have accumulated real evidence through repeated exposure to discomfort that they can survive the things they once feared most. This evidence isn't theoretical, it's lived. They've been embarrassed and survived it. They've failed publicly and rebuilt. They've been rejected and found their footing again. Each of these experiences, rather than weakening them, has been metabolized into proof of their own resilience. Third, they have stopped outsourcing their sense of worth to the shifting opinions of people around them. Their internal scorecard, built on their own standards of effort, integrity, and growth, has become more authoritative to them than the applause or criticism of any single audience. This doesn't mean they're indifferent to others. It means they've stopped being controlled by them. Fourth, and this is the piece most people miss entirely, they understand that this entire process is never finished. Unshakable confidence is not a destination you arrive at and then coast on forever. It is a practice renewed daily, tested constantly, occasionally faltering, and rebuilt again through the same disciplines that built it the first time. Even the most formidable people you've ever admired have moments of doubt, fear, and insecurity. The difference is not the absence of these feelings. The difference is the refusal to let those feelings make the final decision. This is perhaps the most important reframe of everything we've discussed today. You do not need to eliminate fear, self-doubt, or the sting of judgment to become unshakable. You need only to stop letting them drive. They can sit in the passenger seat, chattering as loudly as they want, but you hold the wheel. You decide the direction. And over time, as you accumulate more and more evidence that you can function, act, and even thrive despite their noise, their volume naturally decreases. Not because you fought them into silence, but because they've simply lost their power to control you. So where do you begin practically starting today? Choose one situation you've been avoiding specifically because of the fear of judgment, failure, or discomfort. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It could be a conversation you've been postponing, an opportunity you've talked yourself out of, a boundary you've been afraid to set. Face it this week. Not because the fear will be gone, it won't be, but because facing it anyway is the exact mechanism by which unshakable confidence gets built. There is no shortcut around this. There is no seminar, no book, no video, including this one, that can do this work for you. Information without application changes nothing. The account we've discussed, the reservoir of evidence that you can handle hard things, can only be filled through action. Understand this clearly. The world will always contain critics, failures, rejections, and moments that test your composure. This will never stop, no matter how successful, skilled, or secure you become. The goal was never to build a life free of these challenges. The goal was to build a self capable of meeting them without shattering, a self anchored deeply enough that external storms, however fierce, cannot uproot it. That is what unshakable confidence actually is. Not the absence of fear, not constant positive feeling, not universal approval. It is the quiet, hard-won knowledge, built through repeated tests, survived failures, disciplined composure, and self-reliant standards, that whatever comes, you will still be standing on the other side of it. Build that knowledge one uncomfortable choice at a time, starting today. That is how the unshakable are made.